"Is Catherine your real name?" he asked. "Will you at least answer that?" She hesitated, fearful of yielding any part of herself, even that scrap of information. But as his fingertips slid along her neck, the light caress seemed to disarm her. A bloom of color rose from her throat. "Yes," she choked out. "It's Catherine." They were still kneeling together, her skirts having billowed and settled everywhere. Folds of flower-printed muslin had been caught under one of Leo's knees. His body reacted strongly to her nearness, heat sliding beneath his skin and gathering in inconvenient places. Muscles tightened, thickened. He would have to put an end to this, or he was going to do something they would both regret. "I'll help you up," Leo said brusquely, making to rise. "We'll go inside. I warn you, however, I'm not through with you yet. There's more." But he broke off, because as Marks had tried to struggle upward, her body had brushed against his. They went still, caught front to their breath mingling in uneven surges. The dreamlike feeling intensified. The two of them were kneeling in a summer garden, the air weighted with the perfume of hot crushed grass and scarlet poppies, and Catherine Marks was in his arms. Her hair shimmered in the sunlight, her skin petal soft. Her upper lip was nearly as full as the lower, the curves as delicate and smooth as a ripe persimmon. Staring at her mouth, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck lift in reflexive excitement. Some temptations, Leo decided hazily, should not be resisted. Because they were so persistent that they would only keep returning, time and again. Therefore such temptations absolutely had to be yielded to, it was the only way to be rid of them. "Damn it," he said raggedly, "I'll do it. Even knowing I'll be annihilated afterward." "You'll do what?" Marks asked, her eyes huge. "This." And his mouth descended to hers. At last, every muscle in his body seemed to sigh. At last. The sensation was so pleasurable that for a moment Leo couldn't even move, just felt her mouth with his mouth. Sinking into the feeling, Leo let it take him. He stopped thinking altogether and did everything and anything he wanted, tugging at her upper lip and then her lower one, sealing their mouths together, touching his tongue to hers, playing with her. One kiss started before another had finished, a chain of erotic strokes and skims and nudges. The delight of it went all through him, echoing in every vein and nerve. And God help him, he ached for more. He was dying to put his hands inside her clothes, and feel every inch of her body. He wanted to drag his mouth over her in intimate trails, kiss and taste every part of her. Marks responded helplessly, curling her arm around his neck. She moved against him as if sensation were coming from all directions. And it was. They both struggled to press closer, tighter, their bodies pursuing a new and unsteady rhythm. Had they not been separated by so many layers of clothing, it would have been outright lovemaking. Leo continued to kiss her long after he should have stopped, not only for the sheer pleasure of it, but also because he was reluctant to face what would happen afterward. Their cantankerous relationship could not resume as usual after something like this. It had been set on a new track with an unknown destination, and Leo was certain that neither of them were going to like where it led. Finding that he couldn't release her all at once, he did it by degrees, letting his mouth nuzzle the edge of her jaw, following to the vulnerable hollow behind her ear. Her pulse was swift and vibrant against his lips. "Marks," he said on a rough breath, "I was afraid of this. Somehow I knew." Breaking off, he lifted his head and looked down at her. She squinted through the mist that had accumulated on her lenses. "My spectacles, I've lost them again." "No, you haven't. There's steam on the lenses." As the fogged spectacles cleared, Marks shoved at him. She struggled to her feet, frantically swatting away his efforts to help. They stared at each other. It was hard to say which one of them was more appalled. But judging from her expression, it was probably Marks. "This never happened," she snapped. "If you have the gall ever to mention it, I'll deny it to my last breath." She gave her skirts a few agitated whacks to remove the bits of leaves and grass, and shot Leo a fierce, warning glance. "I'm going to the house now. And don't follow me. Their paths didn't intersect again until dinner, a crowded affair that included his sisters Amelia, Wynne, and Poppy, and their respective husbands Cam Rohan, Kev Maripin, and Harry Rutledge. Catherine Marks sat with Beatrix at the far end of the table. So far none of Leo's sisters had chosen conventional men to wed. Rohan and Maripin were both Romani gypsies, which accounted in part for their ability to fit in easily with the off-kilter Hathaways. And Poppy's husband, Harry Rutledge, was an eccentric hotelier, a powerful man whose enemies reputedly liked him more than his friends did. Could it be true that Catherine Marks was Harry's sister? Leo glanced from one to the other of them at dinner, searching for similarities. Damned if I can't see a resemblance, he thought. The high cheekbones, the straight lines of the brows, the slight feline tilt at the outward corners of the eyes. I need to speak to you, Leo said to Amelia as soon as dinner had concluded. In private. Her blue eyes widened with curiosity. Of course. Shall we walk? It's still light outside. Leo gave her a curt nod. As the two oldest Hathaway siblings, Leo and Amelia had had their share of arguments. However, she was his favorite person in the world, not to mention his closest confidant. Amelia had a great deal of common sense, and she never hesitated to say what she thought. No one had ever expected the pragmatic Amelia to be swept off her feet by Cam Rohan, a dashing Romani gypsy. But Cam had managed to seduce and marry Amelia before she had quite known what was happening. And as it had turned out, Cam was able to provide the level-headed guidance the Hathaways had needed. With his black hair worn a trifle too long and a diamond stud glittering in one ear, he was hardly the image of a staid family patriarch. But it was Cam's unconventionality that allowed him to manage the Hathaways so adeptly. Now he and Amelia had a 9-month-old son, Rye, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Walking leisurely along the private drive with Amelia, Leo cast a proprietary glance at their surroundings. In summer, the Hampshire sun lingered until at least 9 o'clock, illuminating a mosaic of woodland, heath, and grass meadows. Rivers and streams scored the landscape, feeding bogs and wet meadows teeming with prolific wildlife. Although the Ramsay estate was certainly not the largest in Hampshire, it was one of the more beautiful, with an ancient timber forest and 3,000 acres of arable land. In the past year Leo had come to know the estate tenants. He had made improvements in irrigation and drainage, repaired fences, gates, and buildings, and the devil knew he had learned far more than he'd ever wanted to know about farming. All part of Kev Maripin's merciless instructions. Maripin, who had lived with the Hathaways since childhood, had undertaken to learn as much as possible about estate management. Now he was intent on teaching this accumulated knowledge to Leo. It's not really your land, Maripin had told him, until you've put some of your own blood and sweat into it. Is that all? Leo had asked sarcastically. Only blood and sweat? I'm certain I can find 1 or 2 other bodily fluids to donate if it's that important. But privately he acknowledged that Maripin had been right. This feeling of ownership, of connection, couldn't be acquired any other way. Shoving his hands in his pockets, Leo let out a taut sigh. Dinner had left him restless and irritable. You must have had a row with Miss Marks, Amelia remarked. Usually you're slinging arrows at each other across the table. But tonight you were both quiet. I don't think she looked up from her plate even once. It wasn't a row, Leo said curtly. Then what was it? She told me, under duress, that Rutledge is her brother. Amelia glanced at him suspiciously. What kind of duress? Never mind that. Did you hear what I just said? Harry Rutledge is. Miss Marks has been under quite enough duress without you adding to it, Amelia said. I do hope you weren't cruel to her, Leo. Because if so. Cruel to Marks? I'm the one you should worry about. After a conversation with her, I usually walk away with my entrails dragging behind me. His indignation doubled as he saw his sister trying to suppress a grin. I gather you already knew Rutledge and Marks were related. I've known for a few days, she admitted. Why didn't you say anything? She asked me not to, and I agreed out of respect for her privacy. The devil knows why Marx should have privacy when no one else around here does. Leo stopped in his tracks, obliging her to stop as well. They faced each other. Why is it a secret that she's Rutledge's sister? I'm not certain, Amelia admitted, looking perturbed. All she would say is that it's for her protection. Protection from what? She shook her head helplessly. Perhaps Harry might tell you. But I doubt it. By God, someone's going to explain it to me, or I'll throw Marx out on her arse before she can blink. Leo, she said in astonishment. You wouldn't? It would be my pleasure. But think of Beatrix, and how upset she would be. I am thinking of Beatrix. I won't have my youngest sister being looked after by a woman with a possibly dangerous secret. If a man like Harry Rutledge, who has ties to some of the most nefarious characters in London, can't acknowledge his own sister, she may be a criminal. Has that occurred to you? No, Amelia said stonily, beginning to walk again. Honestly, Leo, even for you this is a bit dramatic. She is not a criminal. Don't be naive, he said, following her. No one is exactly who he or she pretends to be. After a curtailed silence, Amelia asked warily, what are you going to do? I'm leaving for London on the morrow. Her eyes widened. But Meropen is expecting you to take part in the turnip planting, and the fertilizing, and, I know what Meropen expects. And I do hate to miss his fascinating lectures on the wonders of manure. All the same, I'm going. I want to spend some time with Rutledge and pry some answers out of him. Amelia frowned. Why can't you talk to him here? Because he's on his honeymoon, and he won't be willing to spend his last night in Hampshire chatting with me. Besides, I've decided to take on a small commission to design a conservatory for a house in Mayfair. I think you want to be away from Catherine. I think something happened between you. Leo glanced at the last brilliant orange and purple vestiges of daylight. The light is going, he remarked in a pleasant tone. We should head back. You can't run from your problems, you know. His mouth twisted in annoyance. Why do people always say that? Of course you can run from your problems. I do it all the time, and it never fails. You're obsessed with Catherine, Amelia persisted. It's obvious to everyone. Now who's being dramatic? He asked, striding back toward Ramsay House. You watch everything she does. Amelia stubbornly kept pace with him. Whenever her name is mentioned, you're all ears. And lately, every time I see you talking or arguing with her, you seem more alive than you have sense. She paused, seeming to think better of what she'd been about to say. Since when? Leo asked, daring her to continue. Since before the scarlet fever. It was a subject they never discussed. The year before Leo had inherited the viscountcy, a fatal epidemic of scarlet fever had swept through the village where the Hathaways had lived. The first to go had been Laura Dillard, Leo's fiancée. Laura's family had let him stay at her bedside. For 3 days he had watched her die in his arms, hour by hour, until she had slipped away. Leo had gone home and collapsed with a fever, and so had Wynne. By some miracle they had both survived, but Wynne had been left an invalid. And Leo had emerged an entirely different man, scarred in ways that even he couldn't fully catalogue. He had found himself in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He hadn't cared if he lived or died. The most unforgivable part was that in his torment, he had hurt his family and caused no end of problems for them. At the worst of it, when Leo had seemed bent on destroying himself, the family had made a decision. They had sent Wynne to recover at a clinic in France, with Leo accompanying her. While Wynne's weak lungs had regained their strength at the clinic, Leo had spent hours walking through the heat-drowsed pan-tiled villages of Provence, up switchback footpaths scattered with flowers, across arid fields. The sunshine, the hot blue air, the long tour, or slowness of life, had cleared his mind and calmed his soul. He had stopped drinking except for a single glass of wine at dinner. He had sketched and painted, and finally he had grieved. When Leo and Wynne had returned to England, Wynne had wasted no time in achieving her heart's desire, which had been to marry Maripin. Leo, for his part, was trying to make amends for the way he had failed his family. And above all, he was determined to avoid falling in love ever again. Now that he was aware of the fatal depth of feeling he was capable of, he would never give another human being such power over him. "Sis," he told Amelia ruefully, "if you have some lunatic notion that I have any kind of personal interest in Marx, forget it at once. All I intend to do is find out what skeleton she has in her closet. Knowing her, it's probably a literal one. I didn't even know about Kat's existence until I was 20, Harry Rutledge said, stretching out his long legs as he and Leo sat in the Rutledge Hotel's clubroom. The quiet and luxurious spot, with its numerous octagonal apses, was a popular gathering place in London for foreign nobility, travellers of means, aristocrats and politicians. Leo regarded his brother-in-law with thinly veiled skepticism. Of all the men he would have chosen to marry one of his sisters, Rutledge would certainly not have topped the list. Leo didn't trust him. On the other hand, Harry had his good points, among them his obvious devotion to Poppy. Harry drank from a snifter of warmed brandy, considering his words carefully before he continued. He was a handsome man, capable of great charm, but he was also ruthless and manipulative. One would expect no less from a man of his achievements, among them creating the largest and most opulent hotel in London. "I'm reluctant to discuss Kat for several reasons," Harry said, his green eyes guarded. "Among them the fact that I've never been particularly kind to her, nor did I protect her when I should have. And I regret it." "We all have regrets," Leo said, taking a sip of brandy, letting the velvet fire slide down his throat. "It's why I cling to my bad habits. One doesn't have to start regretting something unless one stops doing it." Harry grinned, but sobered quickly as he stared into the flame of a small candle lamp that had been set on the table. "Before I tell you anything, I want to ask what the nature of your interest in my sister is." "I'm asking as her employer," Leo said. "I'm concerned about the influence she may have over Beatrix." "You never questioned her influence before," Harry shot back. "And from all accounts she's done an excellent job with Beatrix." "She has. However, the revelation of this mysterious connection to you has me worried. For all I know, the two of you have been hatching some kind of plot." "No." Harry stared at him directly. "There's no plot." "Then why all these secrets?" "I can't explain without telling you something of my own past." Pausing, Harry added darkly, "which I hate doing." "So sorry," Leo said without a trace of sincerity. "Go on." Harry hesitated again, as if weighing the decision to tell him anything. "Kat and I had the same mother. Her name was Nicolette Wiggins. She was British by birth. Her family moved from England to Buffalo, New York, when she was still an infant. Because Nicolette was an only child, the Wiggins had her fairly late in life. It was their desire to see her married to a man who would take care of her. My father Arthur was more than twice her age, and fairly prosperous. I suspect the Wiggins forced the match. There was certainly no love in it. But Nicolette married Arthur, and I was born soon after. A bit too soon, actually. There was speculation that Arthur wasn't the father. Was he?" Leo couldn't help asking. Harry smiled cynically. "Does one ever know for certain?" He shrugged. "In any case, my mother eventually ran off to England with one of her lovers." Harry's gaze was distant. "There were other men after that, I believe. My mother wasn't one for limiting herself. She was a spoiled, self-indulgent bitch, but very beautiful. Kat looks very much like her." He paused reflectively. "Only softer. More refined. And unlike our mother, Kat has a kind and caring nature." "Really?" Leo said sourly. "She's never been kind to me." "That's because you frighten her." Leo gave him a disbelieving glance. "In what possible way could I frighten that little virago? And don't claim that she's nervous around men, because she's perfectly amiable to Cam and Maripin. She feels safe with them." "Why not with me?" Leo asked, offended. "I believe," Harry said thoughtfully, "It's because she's aware of you as a man." The revelation caused Leo's heart to jolt. He examined the contents of his brandy snifter with studied boredom. "Did she tell you that?" "No, I saw it for myself, in Hampshire." Harry turned dry. One has to be particularly observant where Kat is concerned. She won't talk about herself. He tossed off the rest of his brandy, set down the glass with care, and leaned back in his chair. "I never heard from my mother after she left Buffalo," he said, lacing his fingers together and resting them on his flat midriff. "But when I reached the age of 20, I received a letter bidding me to come to her. She had contracted a wasting disease, some form of cancer. I assumed that before she died, she wanted to see what had become of me. I left for England at once, but she died just before I arrived." "And that was when you met Marks?" Leo prompted. "No, she wasn't there." Despite Kat's wishes to stay with her mother, she had been sent to stay with an aunt and grandmother on her father's side. And the father, apparently unwilling to keep vigil by the sickbed, had left London altogether. "Noble fellow," Leo said. A local woman had taken care of Nicolette during the last week of her life. It was she who told me about Kat. I gave a brief thought to visiting the child, but I decided against it. There was no place in my life for an illegitimate half-sister. She was nearly half my age, and in need of female guidance. I assumed she was better off in her aunt's care." "Was that assumption correct?" Leo brought himself to ask. Harry gave him an inscrutable glance. "No." An entire story was contained in that one bleak syllable. Leo wanted very much to hear it. "What happened?" "I decided to stay in England and try my hand at the hotel business. So I sent Kat a letter, telling her where to send word if she ever needed anything. Some years later, when she was 15, she wrote to me, asking for help. I found her in difficult circumstances. I wish I had reached her a little sooner." Feeling a tug of unaccountable concern, Leo found it impossible to maintain his usual veneer of carelessness. "What do you mean, difficult circumstances?" Harry shook his head. "I'm afraid that's as much as I can tell you. The rest is up to Kat." "Damn it, Rutledge, you're not leaving it there. I want to know how the Hathaways got involved in this, and why I had the misfortune to end up as the employer of the most ill-tempered and interfering governess in England. Kat doesn't have to work. She's a woman of independent means. I settled enough money on her to allow her the freedom to do anything she wished. She went to boarding school for 4 years, and stayed to teach for another 2. Eventually she came to me and said she'd accepted a position as a governess for the Hathaway family. I believe you were in France with Wynne at the time. Kat went for the interview, Cam and Amelia liked her, Beatrix and Poppy clearly needed her, and no one seemed inclined to question her lack of experience." "Of course not," Leo said acidly. "My family would never bother with something so insignificant as job experience. I'm sure they started the interview by asking what her favorite color was." Harry was trying unsuccessfully not to smile. "No doubt you're right.